Welcome to the Crimson Dossier. Every case has a file. Not every file has answers.
The forest killer who stayed free for 6 years. June 21st, 1984. A pioneer summer camp outside Moscow called Romantic. A 14-year-old boy sneaks past the gates to smoke a cigarette in the woods. He doesn't come back the way he left. When they find him, he can't speak. He can only cry. Around his neck, a dark, raw line, the mark of a rope. A stranger had attacked him with a knife, hung him from a tree, and left him for dead. The killer made one mistake. He didn't check his work. That mistake is the only reason this story has a survivor at all. This is the case of Sergei Golovkin. The militia would eventually call him the Boa Constrictor. He called himself Fisher. And for 6 years, in the forests around Moscow, he hunted children and walked free. The boy who survived gave police a description. Investigators ran it against their files and got a hit. A local man already known to psychiatric services, previously convicted of assaulting minors. Case closed. Suspect arrested. Except the suspect died by suicide in custody before trial, and without a confession, prosecutors closed the file. It was the wrong man. The real killer was still out there, and because the investigation had already declared victory, no one was looking for him anymore. Spring in the Moscow region has a tradition. Families tap birch trees for sap, the same way other cultures tap maple. You cut the bark, insert a small spout, and come back a day later to collect what's dripped out. On April 19, 1986, 16-year-old Andrei Pavlov took the train out to collect his family's sap. He never made it home alive. His father found his body the next day. Investigators who'd worked violent crime for years struggled to process the scene. 2 months later, near a different pioneer camp, it happened again. A 14-year-old boy. Same pattern. Same brutality. The militia now had a serial killer on their hands, and almost nothing to go on. Investigators interviewed every friend, every classmate, every acquaintance of the victims. One boy, a friend of the second victim, finally gave them something. He remembered a man with a tattoo, a dagger wrapped in a snake, who called himself Fisher. The man had told them he'd escaped from a labor colony and was hiding from police. It was the first real lead in the case. Investigators built a composite sketch. They circulated it across Moscow, then the wider Soviet Union. And then, when they re-interviewed the boy, the story fell apart. He'd made it up. There was no man with a tattoo. He'd wanted attention, and he'd invented a killer to get it. Months of investigative effort, gone, chasing a man who never existed. Here's the strange part. The real killer apparently liked the alias so much that he started using it on later victims. The fictional Fisher became real. Investigators just renamed him the Boa Constrictor for how he strangled his victims. To understand how this man hid for so long, you have to understand who he was before any of this started. Born in Moscow in 1959, Golovkin grew up the oldest child of an alcoholic father and a withdrawn, passive mother. There was severe mental illness on his father's side of the family. His father beat and humiliated him constantly. Golovkin couldn't fight back, not against his father, not against bullies at school or in the neighborhood. So he found things weaker than himself. He strangled and dismembered a stray cat. He boiled aquarium fish alive. And yet, by every classmate's account, he was unremarkable. Quiet, a little awkward, good grades. He graduated with a silver medal. 2 of his classmates went on to found the rock band Crematorium, and they've said publicly, nobody saw anything resembling what he'd become. He studied at Moscow's Tymyazov Agricultural Academy, another decision his father mocked him for. He loved horses, maybe because, as a colleague would later put it, horses never laughed at him. He became a zoo technician, then a zoo engineer at a Moscow horse breeding farm. He did his military service and came out a reserve lieutenant. On paper, a model citizen. By his own later admission, Golovkin had spent years fantasizing about revenge against the people who'd humiliated him, and that fantasy fused with something darker. A fixation on thin, adolescent boys, aged 12 to 14. His first attempt came 2 years before the camp Romantic attack, and it failed. One boy ran. Another fought back hard enough that Golovkin let him go. He wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a predator who kept failing and kept trying again until he succeeded. After the wave of killings in 1986, Golovkin went quiet for 3 years. During that quiet, his career flourished. A promotion, a livestock breeding award, a Soviet exhibition medal. He bought a car and a garage. On September 23, 1989, near the Perkushkovo train station, he picked up a 10-year-old boy hitchhiking. He forced the child into the trunk at knife point, drove him to his garage, and killed him there. He buried the body in the forest. Then he expanded the garage, built out a deep cellar underneath it. To his neighbors, this looked completely normal. Everyone had a cellar for preserves and tools. Between August 1990 and September 1992, at least 8 more boys, aged 11 to 15, were killed in that cellar. By 1992, the case had reached the desk of senior investigator Yevgeny Bakin, the same man who'd helped catch Andrei Chikatilo, the most prolific Soviet serial killer on record. Investigators were so desperate they traveled to interview Chikatilo in prison, on the theory that he might somehow recognize the pattern. Chikatilo's reported response was almost philosophical. He said he'd confess to anything at this point, since it no longer mattered for him, but he genuinely had nothing to do with these killings, and couldn't even guess at how a mind like that worked. Meanwhile, the search radius kept widening, even brushing against the dacha of a senior Soviet political figure, where a grandson sometimes visited. Autumn 1992. Mushroom foragers find 3 bodies. Investigators learn the boys usually traveled in a group of 4, and track down the survivor. He tells them a man he knew as Uncle Seryoza had given them rides before, and had recently asked for help taking something. Quote, investigators started watching this Uncle Seryoza, and the picture clicked into place. A zoo technician, never married, no interest in women, a good employee who volunteered teaching career guidance classes at a local school. Popular with teenagers, sometimes let them ride his horses. And then someone remembered an earlier victim, a boy whose skin had been removed from his back and cured with feed salt, the same salt used for horses. Twice, investigators had already interviewed staff at the horse farm where Golovkin worked. Twice, they'd missed him, because the investigation assumed the killer lived locally, in the Moscow region. Golovkin was registered in Moscow proper. When they finally brought him in for what was framed as routine questioning, he said nothing useful. There wasn't enough evidence to hold him. He sensed the net closing. He tried to run, driving fast toward the border with newly independent Belarus. He didn't make it. A slow-moving freight train forced him to stop at a railway crossing. A plainclothes officer rammed his car. Traffic police swarmed in. Even then, another round of questioning produced nothing. It was a single officer, Yevgeny Durakov, who broke protocol, holding Golovkin overnight against orders. By morning, Golovkin asked to speak to investigators himself. Golovkin initially tried to claim self-defense for a single killing. Then investigators searched the garage and the cellar underneath it. What they found there shook officers who'd worked violent crime scenes for years. Evidence collected included a child-sized galvanized tub, restraints, and surgical tools. After his arrest, Golovkin reportedly attempted suicide. He survived, and from that point gave detailed, calm testimony about the killings. Psychiatric evaluation found Golovkin legally sane, though diagnosed with schizoid traits. His trial ran nearly 2 months. The case file ran to 95 volumes. He was convicted of 11 murders. Investigators believe the true number was closer to 40. On October 19, 1994, the court sentenced Sergei Golovkin to death. He was executed by a firing squad in August 1996 at Butyrka prison in Moscow. 8 months later, in April 1997, Russia introduced a moratorium on capital punishment. Golovkin became the last person executed in the country's history. This has been the Crimson Dossier.